than if they are not given that prompt that might raise that little signal in their head, maybe I'm really too dumb to be here. There's problems, however, with this basically racist explanation. First of all, no clear link has ever been established between genes and other biological features and culture and individual behavior. People may have tried to construct a bridge, but the bridge can't go across that wide a river. Moreover, there's plenty of evidence that Africans in pre-colonial periods were able to govern themselves. We have really very interesting stories of pre-colonial empires in this part of Africa, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, the empire of Zimbabwe in pre-colonial period. Clearly there were governors who ruled things, there was security in much of this area. So just to go back in history really begins to undercut that argument. And of course, as with any category of human beings, there's greater variety within the category than between the average of that group and the average of another group. So that generalizing about the whole category misses a whole series of things that are deviant cases that don't fit what we're going to go on. And as I will argue, there are plenty of cases in Africa where there's good news occurring. If all blacks are too stupid to get their act together, we wouldn't find basically any evidence of good news. Plus, if we start to generalize about racial groups, let's talk about white folks. Let's talk about Adolf Hitler of Germany. Let's talk about Uncle Joe Stalin of the Soviet Union. White people have killed far more human beings in the devastating wars of the 20th century than black people have. Does that mean that white people are uncivilized, can't get their act together, or if they get their act together, it's a pretty murderous act? So we have to be careful about traveling down that trail, because at some point the trail might turn back and hit a group like mine. Another explanation, very widely used, is that, yeah, it's all a bunch of tribes. Africans belong to tribes. These tribes are kind of nasty to each other. They've been killing each other all along. What would you expect when there's a bunch of tribes out there? Some problems. There is no clear definition people would agree on what the hell a tribe is. Often the real problems we're dealing with are with units much smaller than a tribe. The family, the lineage, the clan, groups that are tied together by very close descent links. Nepotism and corruption are often a function of my giving a job to my close relative. Or the problems might be with units that are much larger than tribes, like administrative units of a country, the country itself having been set up by the colonizers, the Europeans, and the administrative units having been established by the outsiders. It's significant that the three most significant civil wars in the early years of independence, Katanga, breaking away from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Biafra, eastern Nigeria, breaking away from Nigeria, and southern Sudan for many, many years. All of these were wars between administrative units of a larger country, not tribal groups. That is to say, each of these three administrative units included many different tribes. I don't know the numbers on here, but most Africans would have many languages they can use. So they have a mother tongue, and there are maybe 750, 800 or so mother tongues in Africa. Africa is an extraordinarily diverse area. The only place close to it is Papua New Guinea in terms of number of language groups. So Africans start with a mother tongue. Then they often would move to a lingua franca, which would be an African lingua franca. In West Africa, it's Hausa or Bambara. So people in many different ethnic groups speak a language of trade. In East Africa, that lingua franca is going to be Kiswahili. So that's a second language. And then they would sometimes, often, if they went to school, move on to a third language, which is normally the language of the colonizer. English, French, Portuguese, etc. And that's pretty impressive. You know, these guys are too dumb. They have figured out some ways to communicate in at least three languages. That's pretty impressive. And Americans, as we all know, think that God speaks in English and God thinks in English, and we generally don't know one language, and that's just fine. That doesn't make us dumb, but it means that we're not as using our brains for these multiple types of communication as Africans have to and can. Now, if you go to school, in general, these schools, particularly secondary school and university, are going to be in the language of the colonizer. Because Africans realize very well the mother tongue is fine from being a kid. Once I get and want a job, or I might want to go to some other country, I better know English, French, and Portuguese. Those are languages of the colonizer, yes, but they're languages that will help me get along in the world. So I spent a year teaching in Tanzania in the late 60s at the university. Everything was in English. Lucky for me, because I didn't know too much Kiswahili. I would have gotten about one sentence done, and that would be it. And the students knew English, and so we could actually communicate in that language. But I remember going back in the summer as part of a project to the villages where some of those students lived. They spoke their language. They translated it to me, the outsider, so I could sort of figure out what was going on. So they figured out a way to deal with linguistic pluralism in their own traditions, but also to come to world languages. Again, just last week I was talking with a fabulous guy named Umfametsi Muki, who got a scholarship to Stanford in the late 1980s, from South Africa, black guy. Went on to become the first black South African to receive a Rhodes Scholarship. Which makes sense. Rhodes made his money in South Africa. Why not give it to some of the people in South Africa who were black who actually helped him create his fortune? Anyway, Umfametsi was saying in wonderfully clipped and parsed English, he's a lawyer, and he speaks some things like a lawyer, wonderful guy, brilliant guy, that he wants to teach his son Setswana, the language from which his group come. And he was complaining that so many members of his generation, essentially the first professional generation of blacks after apartheid, learn English, teach English, talk English to their children at home, and pretty soon that next generation is going to be totally cut off from the village from which they eventually came. And Umfametsi said, no, I don't want to do that. I want my son to go back to my village and be able to communicate in Setswana. English, yes. We're going to go to school where you learn that. But by gum, it's important for him existentially, if you will, culturally, to have the kid know that other language, know where he came from. And that was, I thought that was great.